Today in history. It's April 22nd, and we're going to continue with our journey to the past.
We are. We're going to share 3 different stories with our listeners in Today in History, but before that, I have a quiz question prepared. It is April 22nd, that's today, is internationally known as, number 1, Moon Day, or number 2, Earth Day. The question again, April 22nd is internationally known as, number 1, Moon Day, or number 2, Earth Day. Please put your answers on our Bundy board, or you can text them in for 51 on your cell phone, pounder sharp 1045.
Okay, so like Steve said, we're going to be talking about 3 main items about what happened on this day in history. And why don't we take a look at this list of those 3 items.
Today in history. In 1906, the 1906 Summer Olympics, also known as Intercalated Games, opened in Athens. In 1970, the first Earth Day was celebrated. And in 1993, version 1.0 of the Mosaic web browser was released.
Okay, so today's journey begins with the Summer Olympics of 1906, known as the first Intercalated Games in Olympic history.
Now, to understand the meaning of these games and their historical significance, we need to go back a few years prior to their first official games, the first official games held in Athens in 1896. After officially or successfully hosting the games, Greece suggested that it could hold the event every 4 years.
Oh, I see. But this wasn't what Pierre de Coubertin, the founder of the IOC, the mastermind of the modern version of the games, had in mind. He wanted the games to be held in different countries in order to make the event more international. So the second games in 1900 were held in Paris.
And in the meantime, the first intercalated games had been scheduled by the IOC a year after in 1901 as part of a new schedule, where every 4 years, in between the internationally organized games, there would be intermediate games held in Athens.
So due to various problems and other events, such as the Universal Exposition, the games were dwarfed, that expression we discussed in the first hour, and it wasn't until 1906 that the second Olympic Games in Athens were held, which came to be the first and only intercalated games in history.
They were successful, but World War I and other factors hindered the possibilities of a second games.
That's right. Well, nevertheless, in 1906, games gave us several Olympic traditions, such as the opening ceremony, with the entrance of athletes by delegation holding their respective national flag.
Now, they also introduced the closing ceremony as well as the raising of the national flags of the winners of each discipline. But probably the biggest legacy of the intercalated games is that it paved the way for none other than the Olympic Winter Games.
Okay, now we're showing the picture of the entrance of Korean athletes and the delegate holding this national flag at the opening ceremony of the Olympics. I'm not too sure which year it was, but
Hard to tell, yeah.
right. Okay, it looks very nice. Now, when it comes to homes, as we talked about during the first hour, we can't help but mention our very own planet, our unique and irreplaceable home when we consider the big picture.
Of course, irreplaceable and yet easily taken for granted. So in 1970, an annual event started being celebrated worldwide by more than 192 countries to demonstrate support for environmental protection.
The first Earth Day was boasted the participation of 2,000 colleges and universities, and now the day is celebrated and organized by the non-profit organization Earth Day Network, chaired by the first Earth Day organizer, Dennis Hayes, who said that Earth Day is the largest secular holiday in the world, celebrated by 1 billion people every year.
And I'm not sure if that's Dennis Hayes that we're looking at there on Point and Radio.
I think so, too.
I think so. Now, by 1990, Earth Day mobilized 200 million people in 141 countries and lifted the status of environmental issues onto the world stage. In fact, Earth Day activities in that year gave a huge boost to recycling efforts and helped pave the way for 1992 UN Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro.
Well, now you might wonder, why April 22nd? Well, the organizers determined back in the beginning that the week between April 19 and 25 was the most ideal as it did not fall during exams or spring breaks in the U.S.
I see.
So people had more time to celebrate this great important day, meaning more students were likely to be in class. Moreover, it did not conflict with religious holidays such as Easter, and weather-wise, it was either too cold nor too hot.
Oh, so the weather coincided with the event
Right,
as well.
right. Neither too cold nor too hot, I'm sure.
Well, one of the things that characterized Earth Day are the songs, as many artists have been contributing with their talents. But Earth Day actually has an official anthem. The song was commissioned by UNESCO, and it was created by an Indian poet and diplomat named Adhe K, launching the song last year.
The Earth Day anthem is accompanied by the widely renowned tune Ode to Joy by Beethoven. Okay, that I didn't know.
Interesting. Okay. And now Earth Day, just like the Olympic Games, is surely one of the many ways that brings the world together. But today, we also take a look at another event that does not fall short to belonging in this category. So what are we talking about?
Well, today in 1993, April 22nd, the first version of the Mosaic web browser was launched, while setting the standard for subsequent browsers.
Mosaic is credited with popularizing the World Wide Web, as well as being considered as the first graphical web browser. Interesting, right? Now, 20 years after Mosaic's introduction, the most popular contemporary browsers, such as Google Chrome, Internet Explorer, Safari, Mozilla Firefox, well, they retain many of the characteristics of the original Mosaic graphical user interface, including the URL bar and the forward-back reload buttons.
벌써 모세이크 웹이라고 하면 벌써 20년의 역사를 가지고 있습니다. 자, 그 이후에 아까 말씀드렸던 것처럼 이것은 하나의 그 이후 계속 이어진 그 요즘 많이 쓰이고 있는 브라우저의 하나의 기준을 마련한 셈이 됐다는 거군요.
Isn't it interesting, though, that the modern-day search engines that we use on our up-to-date computers, top-of-the-line computers, they still use the search bar and they
Right.
still have the forward, back, and refresh buttons, just
Exactly.
like the original Mosaic did. I think that's pretty interesting. It's almost like paying tribute to where they came from, right?
그럴 수도 있겠죠. 자, although there were other browsers before Mosaic, actually Mosaic was not the very first one of its kind. None of them caused us enough impact. Well, Mosaic was the web browser which led to the internet boom of the 1990s.
And one of the main reasons for this was that Mosaic was the first browser written and supported by a team of full-time programmers, which was reliable and easy enough to install. And the graphics proved immensely appealing. In other words, Mosaic made the web accessible to the ordinary person for the first time. So before that, either it wasn't accessible or people just didn't know how to use it.
그렇죠. So it made the web accessible to the ordinary people like me for the first time.
That's right.
네. 자, 그러니까 얼마나 그 영향력이 대단히 큰 거였음을 참 우리가 알 수 있죠. All right, that was the Today in History, and it's almost time for us to wrap up today's version of Today in History.
Yeah. Do you ever think about that, though? I mean, can you imagine a time without the internet? You and I both lived in a time without the internet.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
But it's hard for me to think back to that time. What did we
Right.
do at that time, right?
그러니까요.
Yeah.
네.
Times have changed, that's for
네.
sure.
I saw this movie, You've Got Mail, just last night.
Okay.
And there's one scene where this writer, the columnist, he really cherished his old typewriter, electronic typewriter. And then the movie came out, almost 20 years ago.
Right.
And he was so ecstatic about this purchase. And then I was watching the scene and then, wow, that's where everybody's using, maybe some people actually, they type it in their tiny little tablet computer these
that's
days
right.
and easily carry it around. But that guy, the really famous columnist, and then he was so happy with this new electronic huge machine.
I'm sure some writers
Typewriter.
still prefer these days
Oh,
to type
yes,
on typewriters,
that's true.
right? Anyway, that is it for Today in History. Before we wrap it up, how about the answer to the quiz question? It was April 22nd is internationally known as number 2, Earth Day. And we'll go to this break right now. Here's Whitney Houston, One Moment in Time.